Earlier this year, I made a video highlighting a new game I started working on. In that video, I focused on the player movement that would serve as a base for this movement shooter. Next on my list was combat. However, if you take a look at my channel, you may have noticed a sudden lack of uploads or any information. I did hint that a devlog would be coming up soon, but that was like a month ago at this point. But don't be alarmed. This isn't a situation where I lost interest or gave up. Quite the opposite, actually. There's a lot to catch up on. So, what happened? Shortly after my last video uploaded, it was time for me to go back to college. For context, I am a full-time college student going to school for game development, and I will be entering my biggest game development class yet, Capstone. The way Capstone works is students assign themselves projects that relate to whatever they want to focus on in the creative space. Most people focus on making a short animation or modeling a prop or environment. Me, on the other hand, I'm a little insane. I love game design and coming up with new ways to have fun, so I decided that I would continue making this game for my next project. Doing so, I could set up a list of goals for myself and make myself accountable for getting something done. So, what did I assign myself? With this project, because I would be given 7 extra weeks to work on this game, to me this felt like a good amount of time to get a vertical slice of the game done. Now, if you don't know what a vertical slice is, imagine a baked cake. It has all the layers, everything that needs to be considered a cake. Egg, flour, sugar, butter, and so on. A game is the exact way because there's so much that goes into it. A game not only has functionality, but it also has art, music, level design, game design, and a lot more. A vertical slice is a small piece of every single one of those aspects. So if I set a goal to get a vertical slice out for this project, I would essentially have a demo of what the game could look like. Week 1 of this project started right after I uploaded my previous devlog. During this week and the next, I wanted to focus on the combat of the game. I wanted something that hasn't been done much in a movement shooter, but also something that fit the gameplay. During this time, I was also playing Fortnite with a lot of friends, and one of my favorite parts about Fortnite is the satisfaction of getting an elimination with a sniper. So of course, I thought about how a sniper would look in my game. If the player aims at those super high speeds, it would get disorienting very quickly. So I thought it would feel so much better if time slowed down as the player aimed. So we get something like this. A sniper that is super easy to use by giving the player more time to set up their shot. The next thing I did for the combat was add a burst to the game. But what is a burst? You see, some fighting games have a burst option that gives the player in disadvantage a chance to breathe. A little meter fills up for each player, and when they feel they need to, they can use their burst to get the opponent off of them. In this game, I wanted something similar. If players feel overwhelmed with incoming bullets or enemies, they can use their burst to launch enemies back and reflect bullets. At this point, I had everything needed for combat: a shotgun, sniper rifle hybrid, and a burst mechanic. With movement and combat finished, this meant I had everything needed for the functionality, right? Not exactly. Yes, the players can move quickly and shoot, but at this point the player was only shooting at floating spheres. The player needed a reason to use their weapon. So, I made actual enemies for the game. Since I figured that the player would be moving so quickly through the level, I didn't really see a need for the enemies to patrol. I just set them up to look in the player's direction until they were close enough, at which point the enemies would start running at the player. Level design. It was actually a bit of a challenge to start working on level design. I needed to figure out how to make levels that were fun and taught the player the mechanics of the game. I actually did some homework when trying to think of how I would go about doing this. I played a little bit of Neon White and Ultrakill for their tutorials, just to see how they explain their mechanics in a fun way. In Ultrakill, you're taught how to move first before getting into any actual combat. You slide under a gap, punch a wall, then the game tells you you're ready. In Neon White, it's much more simple. The levels in Neon White are small, so they can be beaten super quickly. The first level lets you fiddle around with the movement and controls, as it teaches you how to play the game. But once you get to the end of the level, you think, hold up, I can beat that a lot quicker. That's how they get you. When I began designing my levels, I knew I wanted to teach a player the movement, then the combat. I wanted to make my levels easy to understand, so that any level of player that wanted to play the game could. This led me to teach the player about the movement of the game in level 1, test them on the movement in level 2, teach them combat and test them on combat in level 2 as well. I wanted to do a bit more with the levels, but alas, I did not have much time. At this point in my project, I was scheduled to start on visuals. One of the first things I worked on, which I think the players should know, is the health and burst meter, because it'd be nice to know if the player was close to dying after getting hit. I had a lot of fun designing the health bar UI. I looked into a lot of vaporwave designs and decided to mash together the colorfulness of the 80s and the exaggerated style of Persona 5, giving us this design of the health and burst meter. I'm actually really proud of how it turned out and how it looks in the prototype. I also added this VHS post-processing filter that really helps the game fit that vaporwave style I'm going for. Then I focused on the 3D models. I'll be real, the main weapon model went through so many iterations. The first one looked okay from the front, but pretty bland from the back, which is where the player would be if they were holding the weapon. So I tried again. With this iteration, I like the engine exhaust I added to the back, but I wasn't a huge fan of the handle at the bottom. I wasn't exactly sure how to make that look good at this angle. With my third iteration, I took the gun model from the second iteration, rotated it 90 degrees, and removed the handle completely. I also added a couple of wires to the weapon to make it look more imperfect. I really like the way this design turned out. When I first added the weapon into the game, it was just a cube, and it did not look super interesting. I didn't like that it was just a static cube that was just constantly attached to the player. That's pretty boring and unrealistic. You might be thinking, oh, did he just add animations to the weapon? To that I say, no, I did a little Unreal cheating. In most third-person games or 2D games with a character on screen, when they move, the camera takes a little bit of time to start following the player as well. This is done to add more fluidity to camera movement, rather than just slap the camera on the player directly. If you did that, the camera would just feel stiff and boring, which is why there's an option to add a spring arm to the camera. Not only does the spring arm give the camera that realistic camera lag, but it can also keep the camera from clipping through walls, among other things. So what I did was just slap a spring arm onto my weapon, parented that spring arm to the player camera, and added a bit of camera lag. I didn't even have to touch animation at all. It just works. Look at that, it's moving from side to side, it's flowing. The next to last thing on my to-do list was models. I quickly made some 3D models for the enemies, tutorial pillars, and buttons. I didn't spend a lot of time doing the modeling and art. I'll be completely honest, I was more focused on making sure the game worked. But I was happy with what I made in such short time. My favorite models were the enemies. I modeled them as just floating heads and eyes, so I wouldn't have to worry about rigging and animation. At least, not yet. The final thing I did was menus. I'm actually really happy with the settings menu, because the one thing that people were asking about in my last game were options to lower the sensitivity. And I'm happy to say, you absolutely can now. You can also change the volume of the music. These settings follow you throughout the levels by using a game instance blueprint. This blueprint runs throughout the entire game and persists throughout levels. That also means you can play music through it that will persist through levels. Some people were upset that I didn't include much gameplay in my last video, so I'm sharing gameplay here. I'm currently working on a version of this game with actual 3D models that are textured, rigged, and animated, as well as levels and combat mechanics that have a little more depth to them. I'm going to GDC, Game Developers Conference, this weekend, so I want to polish this game up as much as possible and give it an actual theme and story. Here's a sneak peek at what I've been working on for that. Also, if you liked what you saw in this video, you can actually play the prototype right now. It's up on my itch.io page. The link is in the description. If you're also going to GDC, let me know. I'd love to meet you. I'll be back to discuss how things went over there. Hopefully it won't take as long this time. But yeah. But hey, that's just a devlog. A game devlog. Thanks for watching.